We are here to discuss a viral reel, which sounds silly in a way, I think, but I actually feel like it's really helpful to like break things like this down. I'm actually going to even pull up, hey Deborah, I'm actually going to even pull up some of the data on it so I can just like walk you through it specifically. But I feel like it's really helpful because when we see things like that happen, I think like there's so much curiosity of like, what does that feel like? What does that do for someone? Is that really worth it? All of that kind of stuff. And so, personally, before I had this experience, I had never had that, obviously. So, yeah, I just like it would have been nice to be like, oh, what can I expect? What would it do for me? What does it matter? Hey, Manisha. So, I just want to talk through all that. And obviously, you guys know I'm a data nerd. Um, so I wanted to share some of that too, because I feel like that's always a curiosity too, right? Like we can see obviously on other people's reels, like how many views or plays it got, but that's really all we know. And so being able to know some of the behind the scenes stuff, I feel like is really helpful too. So want to share all of that. Hey, Lucy, so good to see you. Um, cool. All right. So I'm going to first talk about like what I think made it go viral, because I actually think that's helpful to kind of like dissect that sometimes. I also want to share a little bit about the specifics of that because there were a few things that surprised me. We'll talk about mindset and a lot of the negative comments. We'll talk about like what it actually did do for me or what it didn't. Again, I think that it's helpful to know. Like, sometimes it's like, am I shooting for that? Am I not shooting for that? Like, do I want that? Do I not want that? Like, I think it can be really confusing. So we'll talk through that. And we'll talk about like how to handle it if that happens, like what to do to protect your peace. And then like kind of like how do you put yourself out there when the internet is unhinged, basically? I think like that was some of my takeaway from this is like people are unhinged, but like I think like that's the landscape we're in to a certain extent. And so I feel like we have to be able to like talk about that and name that as well. Hey, Michelle. Good to see you guys. Oh, before I forget, giveaway for today is any product of mine that you want. So basically any product I sell apart from one-on-one coaching, um, you get to pick. So if you're like, I want whatever, maybe something new coming very soon, or like million her or whatever. I just realized that was open. It's all yours. You pick. Um, Michelle said the internet really is unhinged with way too much time. Totally excited to chat about that. I think that's so helpful just to say that almost. You know what I mean? Because I feel like sometimes it's like, it just like lets you make light of it. It's like, oh yeah, people are just unhinged. Who the fuck cares? Okay, so let's talk about this. Diverse is so fun. So the first thing in terms of what made it go viral. So let me just like back up to what it was. So the reel that, let's see, I don't even know how many views it has right now. I can just look and tell you, can't I? Let us see. I think it has like, yeah, a little over 1.1 million. Um, so it was a reel that I did about paying off our nanny student loans. So I said the most fun thing I did with money this year wasn't buying something bougie, going somewhere new, or even investing in something cool. It was telling our nanny we were taking care of her student loans for her. And it was like a little video of when we told her. So anyway, that's what it was for context, if that's helpful to be like, why does this matter? So a couple things about that. One, I think part of why it went viral was because that was so broad, right? And so I think sometimes that's helpful for us to remember. I think sometimes when we're creating very like niche specific content and wanting it to go viral, we kind of miss that those are pretty different things. Um, and it's okay to play with both. Like there's nothing wrong with both, but I think just not trying to get the same thing out of both is really helpful. Like this wasn't like going viral to like show people I'm a great business coach. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's important to say too. It like typically the things that are more likely to go viral, I think, especially if you're in the business space or whatever, are a little more broad and general. Um, and I think we just have to always remember there's like a bit of a line there. We're like, yes, sometimes it's good to get new exposure, but like a lot of the exposure, if it's not for people who would ultimately be interested in your services or following you, what does it matter? Um, besides like a vanity metric. So I just wanted to say that because I think that's important to say, like part of why it went viral is because it was really broad. Another reason it went viral, which I think is always one of the like most, what's the word? One of the singular most important things in something going viral is it elicited a big emotion in someone. So to totally could be any emotion. Like some people were very pissed about that. Some people like really disagreed with it. Some people thought it was amazing. People said it made them cry. Like, you know, um, it it ran the gamut, but it was still very like much creating an emotional response. And almost every reel that really takes off, really goes viral, creates an emotional response. And I think that's just helpful to name where, it doesn't mean that that's what you should be shooting for 24/7, but it is to say like that is a super helpful tool if that's what you're after, is recognizing that having kind of like virality is often dependent on being able to evoke an emotion or like create an emotional response in someone. That's what makes it, get more of the views, more of the watches, more of the shares, more of the saves, more of the comments. Like it's like bringing something out. So I think that's really helpful to think about in content creation is like, am I creating content that evokes emotion? Even if that's a laugh or whatever, like that really is one of the most important components, I think, of any viral content. Um, so I feel like that's just like a good takeaway. Like this was very strongly emotionally oriented, right? And it touches on something for people like maybe they're picturing what it would be like if someone paid off their loans. Maybe they're picturing what it'd be like to do something really, really nice to someone or really, really nice for someone they love and care about. But it's really about evoking that feeling, experience, emotion. Does that make sense? Let me know. But I think that if I could tie this to like almost one thing that made this one really pop, that's probably it. Um, so again, it doesn't mean like everything you make has to be exactly that, but it is helpful to be like, oh, could I just think about that a little bit more in my content planning and creation? Could I just think about evoking emotion this much more? Would that make a big difference? Right. Hi, Alyssa. So keen to hear your takeaways on this. Amazing. So happy you're here. Thank you. Um, and obviously, if you guys have questions, let me know too. Happy to answer any of those. Let me think my thing is not updating. Hold on just one second here. Just want to make sure I can see your things. Okay, cool. Yeah, so emotion. I think that we oh no, I just smudged a nail, you guys. After if you missed the beginning, part of why I was late was a nail fiasco, and now I have smudged a nail. So let's try to fix that. Um, but I think it's just helpful to like have that as a goal, really, that you bring into your content. Again, not every time, but it's interesting how like easy it is to think about that when you're thinking about how important that is. You know what I mean? Um, so that's a big one. Another thing that I thought was interesting about it taking off, and I've actually been seeing this a little bit more, is I feel like it used to be like what happens in the first like very, very, very small period of time to that predicts how your reel or will perform. But actually, I posted this on a Wednesday, I believe. I'm almost positive it was a Wednesday. And it really didn't start gaining like a shit ton of traction until probably that Saturday. That's when I was like, oh, fuck, like this is starting to reach an audience that is not my audience. Like that's when some of the crazier comments started rolling in. And when it was jumping by like 100,000 views, like really, really quickly. So I feel like that's just helpful to know too. I think sometimes we're like quick to write off something within the first like couple hours, even, or definitely 24 hours. And that was not my experience with this at all. Like it really took quite a bit of time and momentum to pick up. And then from when it really started going crazy on like that Saturday, it sustained that for a while. Um, so like, yeah, it just was like quite an ongoing thing where I think sometimes we think of virality being like quite a quick thing and then it's over. And that kind of wasn't my experience here. So just helpful to note that like be checking back on your old shit and seeing how it's doing. Like don't assume it's dead within a few hours or 24 hours. Lucy, you're doing your nails while listening to me. That's so funny. It's the best. I did it right before this because I was like, then I'll be on the live stream and I'll have plenty of time to dry. But then I got it on my keyboard. It was the whole thing. Michelle says, nosy behind the scenes question, but I'm curious how you went about filming this. Did you ask your nanny if it was okay to film before you shared the news? Did she know at that point that you wanted to share the video? Curious on how to think through that content when it involves others and not just your thoughts around it. Yeah, totally. So I knew I wanted to just film it, period. Like, I think it's so easy to like, and I'm not saying you're assuming this, Michelle, I'm saying the internet. So just, I think it's so easy for the internet to assume like you're only doing something to film it or to have like a certain piece of content or reaction. But this was totally the opposite of me. This is something that I've always wanted to do. Like since I paid off my student loans, I've always been like, I want to do this for someone else. So it was like not about filming it for a reel at all. It was like so emotional for me and so special for me. So my husband said, hey, do you want me to film this? And I said, yes, absolutely. Because even if it was just for me, like I wanted to have that. And so I think that's helpful to say where it's like sometimes you may just film it because it's special for you. And so that was really more of my thought here. Like I was like, I may or may not want to do something with this, but I wasn't even really thinking about it like that at the time. I was thinking about it like, I really want this. But I said to my husband, like, make sure you don't get our nanny in it too much because I don't want her to feel like she's supposed to have a specific reaction or like, whatever. Like, I really wanted it to be about me and like getting to do this thing that I was like so excited to do. So, I didn't want the pressure on her. You know what I mean? For it to be like, oh, give us a certain face or a certain reaction. So I was just like, film from behind. So it's like about me kind of thing. Um, so yeah, he did that. And then I think he was the one who said to me, like, are you going to share that? And I was like, oh, I don't know. That feels kind of edgy to share. But then I thought about it and I was like, actually, I think I am. Like, that's really cool. And it's really special. And like, it's so special to me that I really want to, yeah, celebrate that. And so what I did was I clipped the part of the video that I was going to use and I actually sent it to our nanny and I said like, oh, I made the whole reel actually. Like I made the whole reel and I was like, hey, this is exactly what I'm thinking of sharing. It is totally unimportant to me if I actually do share this or not, but I wanted to give you like an exact version of what it would be. Are you comfortable with this or not? Totally okay either way. And actually, when I sent it to her, it still had the sound on of me telling her and her, like having a reaction, whatever. And she said, yep, totally good. Happy for you to share. I think that's awesome for you to share. She was like so kind about it. And then I realized the sound was on and I was like, oh my gosh, just so you know, I'm not going to share it with the sound at all. And she was like, I totally don't care if you share it with the sound, whatever feels good. So I ultimately decided not to because I didn't, again, want it to feel like it like needed to be a certain reaction from her or whatever. Um, but yeah, so basically filmed it for myself, thought about like, what would I want in terms of like what mattered to me in doing that, and then made the thing and asked her permission. Like the reason I made it first and then asked for her permissions because I wanted her to feel clear on exactly what she was saying yes to, right? Like I didn't want her to be like, oh, I mind if you share it. And then like I ended up doing it in a way that like she was like, ooh, except I wouldn't have wanted that or whatever. So yeah, that's basically how it happened. I hope that's helpful, but happy to share anything else there. Um, okay, let me see what else I wanted to tell you. Okay, so we talked about what made it go viral. We talked about like, it took a long time, which I think is helpful to see. Okay, so let's talk about mindset and like some of the comments. Yep, that was smart. Awesome. Thank you, Deborah. Okay, so I would say by and large, most comments were pretty kind. There were a few that definitely were not. um, and so one of them was about like how selfish it was. And that one really pissed me off. And I actually went on like a whole rant about it on stories because I feel like this idea that like you can't do something for someone else and benefit from it is like one of the things that I feel like like just a curse on women and like needs to be eradicated is this idea that like it's only you're only doing something generous for someone else if you don't get any benefit from it in any way, shape, or form. And I just disagree with that so fully. And so that one really pissed me off. And I like went on a rant about it and stuff. And I had a little bit of an interaction with the woman in the comments. And she ultimately was like, you can't say this wasn't selfish. And I was like, it totally was selfish. Like, we can just agree to disagree here, but I think we're saying the same thing. Like, it absolutely was selfish. So I say that to say that was kind of like my first, like, blah, kind of thing. And Kenny was like, what, why are you even going back and forth with her? And I'm like, because this isn't about me. Like, I am not personally triggered about this. I am so mad for every woman who thinks that's how it's supposed to be. And I just cannot let that go by. And then other comments were like kind of the same vein, but I was like, okay, I feel like I already addressed that. And then some man says something about how like I would have gotten the money from a divorce and that's how I did it. And so I felt like, okay, well, this is just fun to react to. So I like made a piece of content reacting to that. And the reason I did that is because I was like, I feel like my whole audience is going to resonate with that so much. Like some man making assumptions that because she had money, there's no way she like got it for herself kind of thing. And so kind of same. It wasn't like I was like super personally triggered, but I was like, this is like a systemic thing that we need to talk about, just like it's systemic for women that like you can't do something for someone else if it also benefits you. Yeah, exactly, Lucy. Lucy said, I feel like it's such a patriarchal thing as well. 100%. Right. So a lot of these were like, they didn't feel personal. It felt like, wow, I'm just watching like the craziness of the world play out on this reel. Um, and then some other comments that I got, which I actually think I'm going to do a reel about, I just haven't gotten around to it yet, were of other mothers saying stuff like, why don't you stop making the money that allows you to do this and actually take care of your child yourself? Or like, oh, I thought you were going to say the coolest thing you did this year was actually raise your own child and things like that. And that one did not, those did not personally get to me too much because I feel quite grounded in like who I am as a mom and the decisions I've made there and the fact that like we only have like 30 hours of childcare a week. Like I am very much raising my child. Even if it was 60 hours, like I'm still the mom. I'm still very much raising my child, right? I know. Exactly. Wow. Seriously. Ew. What the fuck? I know. Ew, what the fuck? Um, so there were quite a few like that. And I feel like what I will say about that is not my personal trigger, right? Like I feel pretty grounded in that. Like I'm a good mama, all those things. However, if that was a personal trigger for me, I think that would have really thrown me. Like to be honest, I have like some body stuff and then have lost, a bunch of weight this year and have kind of had to like come like shift my perception on all that. I feel like if there were a bunch of comments on like how I looked fat or shitty or something, that probably would have really impacted me. So I'm just saying that to say like I'm not like, oh, nothing could impact me ever. I'm just like these things aren't my personal triggers and I feel like I've worked through a lot of them. Exactly, Lucy, internal patriarchal stuff too, right? And I feel like I was able to see it for what it was. Like, oh, this is just the system playing out on this reel. But again, like, I think it's important to say that it probably depends on what your own personal triggers are, how much this stuff will impact you. Um, uh, yeah, so I think that we just have to like pay attention to that and be careful of that. But I think like one of the best mindsets that I took that I think you can take is that like this has nothing to do with me. Like I struck a chord with people because it had to do with like money and mothering and having a nanny and all of these things that are such hot buttons in our society. Money, such a hot button. Mothering. Oh my God, everyone wants to tell you how you should do it, right? Having a nanny, like for some reason, that's so like taboo in some ways still. So I feel like to me it was like, oh, this just made sense. Like I just hit on a bunch of like hot topics accidentally. And so that's just playing out here. So I think like that's a great mindset to have around stuff like this is like it has almost nothing to do with you ever, has everything to do with like what that triggers inside someone when they see it, right? Yeah, such fucking BS, totally. Lucy said, I love the demonstration of getting support through motherhood. My partner's sister is a doctor and she has a nanny. She spent years and a shit ton of money to get there. The idea of someone calling her selfish for getting support for her kids just gets me going so much. So I'm grateful when there are mothers out there demonstrating another way. Thank you. I don't currently have kids, so it's amazing to have this model. Yeah, totally. Like I think that's the thing. And I also think so many people have like gotten really big or they're big influencers out there who have the nanny but won't talk about it. Right. So it seems like they're doing it all and it's so confusing to people. There's like a few people that I can think of specifically where like it's almost like come out later. There's been articles where it's like, oh yeah, well, we actually take a nanny on every trip we go on. It just doesn't look good to share that or whatever. And so to me, it's like so important to say, like, the only way I do this is through that. And that's why it's so important to me that we do amazing stuff for her and like support her because she's such an integral part of our family and this model, you know. But I feel like it's helpful to say that and name that. But again, of course, it's gonna hit some hot buttons with people. But I think like, yeah, if you're gonna play the social media game, if you're gonna play with evoking emotion in your content, like you kind of just have to be ready that whatever that evokes in other people, it's going to come back out at you. And so doing it around something you feel super grounded in, I feel like is really important. Like, again, I feel so grounded in the decision to have a nanny, to be that kind of mom, and to have paid off her student loans. There's nothing anyone could have said that would have made me go, oh, probably shouldn't have done that, or like, oh, I should really change. So I think if you are going to put out content like that, it's so important that you feel so sure in it, so that almost anything anybody could say, you're like, nah, I got that. If you're putting out content where you wouldn't back it up that fully, I would second guess it, because that, if it does pop off, that's going to be such a miserable fucking experience. Like, you want something where you're like, I could totally double down on that, you know? So yeah, I would just say like that was a really big takeaway for me, is like feeling so certain. It doesn't mean you would never like have different perspective or be willing to change your mind, but like for the most part, feeling wildly certain about what you're sharing. Because if it does go that way, you want to feel that level of certainty where you're like, I'm so grounded in my decision. Whatever everybody thinks has nothing to do with me is so key. Um, I was also a nanny, and let me tell you, everyone's happier with support. Mini side rant over. Yeah, Lucy, I could not agree more. So interesting and challenging and beautiful and amazing to parent, but like doing it like with the idea that you should like run a successful business and parent without support and whatever, I think it's so challenging. It's so much pressure. Deborah said, yes, the transparency is so needed, especially to break down the superwoman narrative. 100%. Michelle said this. Hey, Morgana, good to see you. So yeah, just like some good mindset in that. So let's talk about what it actually did and data. So let me pull it back up for 1 second. And we'll just talk about some stuff here. I think it is so useful. Okay. So, there was like 840 saves, 592 cents, 535 comments, a little over 53,000 likes, and about 1.11 million, uh, what's it called? Views. So of my followers, I think I have like about, I could probably just look. I think I have like 12.9K followers. Of my followers, it reached 3,539. And of my non-followers, it reached 507,333. So I think that's helpful to see, right? As like, okay, so let's say I reached about like 507,000. Am I saying that right? Yeah. 507,000. Why is this hard? Accounts that weren't my followers, right? And so that content was not aimed for that. And I think that's what we have to realize too, is like in the caption, I wrote it like you kind of already knew me. So I didn't give a lot of my story. I said, if you haven't heard that part of my story, blah, blah, blah. And it was like this much. So I was writing it for people who knew me, because that's mostly how I write my content. I mean, obviously, like, you know, so someone can understand it if they find me on the explore page, but for the most part, it's like with people who like have a certain lens of like being a woman, a business owner, that kind of thing. And so if you think about the fact that it reached over 500,000 people that were never following me before, of course the message is going to be misunderstood. Um, So I think that's helpful to recognize too. Like, there is no way that you're going to get that much reach without a message getting misunderstood because you didn't write it with that much reach in mind, typically, right? Like, that's never happened to me. I wasn't like, let me write this post in case it goes to like, this many people so they'll get it. And I couldn't have possibly written it with that much context or background or anything. And so I think that's just important to note. Michelle said I had a reel go viral once that evoked an emotion and thought I was not aiming for, and that I was not aiming for. Basically, I missed the mark on how I worded it, and woof, that was a learning moment that needed some repair, but I did it and I'm still here. Yeah, so good. And yeah, sometimes that's it too, is like, or maybe it wouldn't have missed the mark if it was for like the right people, but then when it goes to so many more people, it totally does miss the mark, right? Like if I could have rewritten that caption, knowing what I know now or knowing where it would have gone, of course I fucking would have. You know what I mean? But I think it's just really helpful to be like, that's okay. There's nothing to go back and change. Like if something takes off, you almost have to be positive that people are going to misunderstand it. Like that's another mindset. The internet is a space where if you want to be visible, yeah, Michelle just nailed it. Exactly what I was saying, where if you want to be visible, you almost have to be willing to be misunderstood. 1000%. And that's where that other mindset comes in, is you have to be so sure in yourself that it feels okay if other people misunderstand you, right? Lucy said, I recently had a reel go to 200K, and so far people get what I'm saying. But for the few people that don't, it's okay because I'm so secure in what I said and what I meant. Bingo. Right? You guys were like nailing my points. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But I think that's exactly it. You're like, okay, well, I could never give all the context that would be needed in this one little reel and caption. And so I just have to be grounded in it enough that if someone sees it that makes an assumption or has their own trigger or has their own reaction, it kind of doesn't matter. So I just feel like that's really helpful, but it's helpful not just for virality, it's helpful for anything. Like if you can approach your content with that in mind, like life gets so much easier. Like that could be like one person making a comment on your post. Do you know what I mean? Like I just think it's so helpful to be like, what would I feel so rooted in that even if this went to a million people, I would be like, yeah, I still believe in everything I did and said there, you know? Um, so I gave you some of the data there. What I think is important to say is it definitely did grow my reach a lot. And I think it grew my followers. I would say so it's kind of hard to tell because I've been focused on reels for about 3 months. I started like early to mid October and we're in mid January. Yeah, so like 3 months I've been going hard on reels. Um, in that time, I would say my account has grown by probably 2,400 people. I think I was at like, or do I mean 1,400? Yeah, so I think around 2,000 people. So even though I reached, over 500,000 accounts, had over a million plays, like I didn't grow with that much, but I feel like that's helpful to name because it's like sometimes we make this goal virality or something, and it's like I probably would have grown more with a really, really, really niche one, like niche thing that popped off to like 15,000 people or something. Do you know what I mean? Like that probably would have done more for me. And I think that's really important to say because I feel like sometimes we're just shooting for the wrong target, you know? Michelle said, even with all the context in the world, people will misunderstand us because we're all viewing the world through our filter lens. And so many of us aren't willing to be able to see outside of it, no matter how much context they have. Totally agree. Lucy said, something I'm thinking about is how to be okay not recreating that result high views and not making the lower views mean I'm missing something or doing it wrong. Do you have any thoughts around this? Oh my gosh, yes. I think like almost exactly what I was saying. We're like, that didn't do enough for me. Like, I mean, I'm happy that it happened. Like, I actually feel like the learning I got from it and the insight and the data and everything, like, I'm very grateful for that. It's obviously given me a lot of content. But I don't think that's usually the most quality thing. Like some people message me and were like, are you looking for another nanny? Do you know other people looking for nannies? So like, I feel like some people just followed me to be like, what's this bitch doing? Or like, well, like, does she need to make a hire or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think, sorry, I'm freezing. I have a heating pad on and I need to turn it off. I have been, it's so cold. It's fucking freezing here in Florida. And my husband thinks it's not freezing. So it's like 68 degrees in our house. It's so cold. I know for most people, 68 degrees is not cold, but when you live in Florida, it's very cold. So I would say like in many ways, you don't want to aim for that many views most of the time because it's not usually like the best, most niched thing that you can get. Like I've seen more results in terms of like outreach, people joining my wait list, all that kind of stuff from reels that had nowhere near that. Like I think I had one reel that had maybe like 9,000 plays or something like that. And the amount of outreach I got on that and the amount of people being like, can I have a wait list link or can I join your wait list or whatever from that versus this was so vast. So I think it's just important to say that. Lucy said, I'm also noticing that I keep getting likes on those two videos and not recent ones, which I'm so grateful for, but I also want my new stuff to get traction. I mean, usually when you have a reel go viral, it will help you push your other stuff out. Like the reels around this reel probably got better reach, but I think sometimes it does take time. So it honestly could just be that your new stuff is taking time to build up that traction. Yeah, Michelle, totally. 9 degrees in Michigan. Oh my God, I would literally die. Yeah, it's just cold, period. Oh my God, -3. Yeah, no. It's colder than 68 out there. It's like set to 68 in our house, but like, oh my God, it's so cold. Um, I think it was like 49 this morning. I was like losing my mind. Um, but yeah, I would say like if it happens, it's great, but also don't feel like you have to shoot for that. Like even just another example, let me see if I can find this really quick. It's like Sarah and I did a collaboration one a couple days ago. Um, it's this one on Instagram, if you guys know what I'm talking about, where we're like walking with the coffees. And I think it's almost at, let me see, it's at 19.3K views. That's going to probably do nothing for me, to be perfectly honest with you. Like maybe it'll get me some follows. I'm sure it will. But like all that was more like, like you need women in your life who blah, blah, blah. There was like not a lot of like, oh, someone's going to like hire me from this. And so you really do want to play with both, right? Like the thing you don't want to get so obsessed with is like just getting the metric of views or engagement because it's not always the determiner of like getting the sales. Sometimes it can lead to the sale and it can bring you in more people that ultimately like want to make that sale, but it depends on what you do too. Like what I do is quite specific, like high-end one-on-one coaching with a revenue share model. Like a reel on like supporting other women probably isn't gonna like get me a shit ton of leads, but it can create growth and thought leadership and connect with my people. And that's really good too. So just remember, you're always trying to do a bit of a mix. The reels that always get me the most traction in terms of like outreach, waitlist, interest, can I work with you interest are always way more specific and are shit that would never ever go viral. Like one of the ones that also really popped for me in terms of like people reaching out was like I did this like green screen of like actual results my clients got this year. So many comments on that. So many like, or not actually, there wasn't that many comments. There's like 20 comments on it. There was only 7,317 views and so much outreach and messages from that. So just a reminder, like that reel, it's the green screen one, probably did way more for my business than the 1.1 million one. And I think it's just really helpful to hear that. Again, not that it's not fun or a helpful learning tool or that it didn't help me grow in some ways, but I just think we all need that perspective where like virality isn't always getting you what you want or isn't always the thing that you necessarily like need to lean into. Obviously, it depends on what kind of account you have. Like if you're like doing Amazon links or something like that, then obviously virality is like way more important. But if you're selling like high-end coaching, it's just not as much. And so I think just remembering that is so hugely important. I was at a retreat last week called CEO Mama, which was really amazing. And it's basically like other like high 6, 7, 8, 9 figure business owners together that are all moms. And I probably have one of the smallest, if not the smallest, I would imagine, following out of like anybody there. Like most of them are like Instagram queens. Um, and I still have just as successful of a business and take up just as much space in that room and hold just as much of a place. And everybody asks me for support just as much. Do you know what I mean? So I think just remembering that like one does not equal the other is really, really helpful. It's more like, what do you need for your particular business to be successful? What makes your business model work? What makes you really get the results? For me, where I really see results is when people feel really personally connected with me and really have that specific need. So a viral reel, like, probably isn't going to do that for me. If anything, what's going to do that for me is the one I did about the man, you know, that is what's going to make my audience connect with me and be more likely to hire me, to be honest. So, like, it gave me good content to do that. But, like, does that make sense? I just think that's so important to say. Sorry, I need to sip. And I forgot that it was boba. So now I have boba in my mouth. But um, I wanted to share that because I think that's just unless you've had that, it's so easy to forget that, or it's so easy to maybe like even go into a room like that with like a CEO mama situation and feel like, oh, I should be growing more there. I should be focused on that more. Or like, why don't I have as many followers as her or whatever? And I just cannot tell you enough how important it is that like you really, really like keep that context of like what matters for me, what matters for my business, what's actually getting me what I want and where I want, you know? Um, sorry, I need to like update the video again. Here we go. What else do I want to say about this? I think I shared the data. I shared what it did for me, what it didn't do for me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say. I think just in terms of like how to put yourself out there is, yeah, like really play with both and see what gets you results and what works for you. Having been doing this for about 3 months now, which I know is like nothing compared to like most people, but I really pay attention to the data. So I feel like I'm a pretty good source of information here. I've just experimented with a lot of different things. Like, how do reels that are more broad and go more viral do for me? How do reels that are like way, way, way more specific do for me? How do reels that are kind of somewhere in the middle? Is it seem to resonate more when I do this versus this, or when I take this tone versus this tone? Like, the biggest thing I would say is like focus on learning that and looking at your data and seeing what really matters. And I don't just mean like the qualitative or quantitative data, I mean the qualitative too. Like, what makes people reach out to you? What are people DMing you about? What are people, asking for something from you about? Like, those are different things. Absolutely no one, not a single fucking person, and this is so important to say, from that nanny reel DM'd me and said, I want to hire you. Not a single one. Whereas like that other one with the client results, I don't know, 5, 4, something like that, 5 probably. Like, that's vast. Like, what it obviously I have a wait list, so it's kind of different. It's not like I made 5 immediate sales, but let's say I would have, right? Well, my clients paid me 7,500 for 6 months plus revenue share. So let's see. Hmm. That could have been 37,500 in sales from one reel, not to mention revenue share on top of that, right? If I was taking clients right then, compared to zero from the viral thing. So just remember that it's so, so important to think about like, I need to know what works for me, what works for my business, and what actually gets me more of what I want. Because yeah, it can feel good and it can feel like an ego boost when your stuff's popping, but you really have to know what that means. Again, just like yesterday, I was saying that one with Sarah's almost at 20K that we did recently. Like, is that fun? Sure. Is it like a fun little game to go on Instagram and be like, oh, now it's at 19K or whatever? Sure, it's super fun. Is anyone going to DM me from that reel and ask to hire me? Nope, they're not. So remember, focus on you, what works for your business, look at the data, but look at it with like a discerning eye of what actually matters. Um, Michelle said such a good reminder to focus on the goal of your business. Was just playing chess with Ori this morning and he had to keep coming back to the goal and had to keep coming back to the goal when I was tempted to take his pieces or be defensive versus taking more offensive risks. I love that. Yeah, Michelle said people keep asking me to start doing color analysis. It's a no for me, right? Like, you have to do what works best for you and you have to be able to draw the line, right? Like, could I go make a bunch more viral emotion evoking things like that that would probably pop? I'm sure if I like sat down and thought about that and was like, what would evoke emotion? What would really pop here? What, encompasses all of this. Sure. But like, why? What would it do for me? I want to go make more like that green screen one with client results. Like, and again, I'll do both, right? Like, because I like playing with it, I like learning from it, but it's just so helpful to see. So just remember what your goal is. You don't need virality. You don't need 100,000 followers. Like, that's not always required for most business models. So don't trick yourself into thinking it is and having to put all this attention into something that's probably not going to get you the results you want anyway. That is really my biggest takeaway. And also, like, I think social media really is fun. Like, that was the other thing that came up for me. I'll just share this really quickly and then I'm going to jump. But like, overall, I found this experience very fun and enlightening. It wasn't like, oh my God, this is so horrible. It was like, oh my God, some people are fucking unhinged, but it's actually interesting and fascinating. And how cool that I like get to share this with a lot of people and get to have this conversation and get to see what this experience is like. And like, I think overall, it's like so cool that we get to do this. It's so cool that I got to use this as a tool to connect with my audience more, to learn more. Yes, people are unhinged, but like if you make it what you want to make it, you can almost always have a good experience on social. Like I could be obsessing about those like comments that like called me a shitty mom or whatever, but it just doesn't matter to me because I like know what's true. And what is true is that that was a really fun experience in my business overall. Like I found it interesting. I found it intriguing when it was like really popping. Like I said, it started to on that Saturday. I remember Kenny and I were at the mall and Bennett was like in his stroller and we were pushing him around. I was just like, look at how funny these comments are. Like it was a funny, fun, light experience if you let it be. And so that's just a reminder too, is like social media is about as light or heavy as we kind of choose to make it sometimes. And so permission to lean toward the lighter side, even if someone's saying something fucking crazy about you or whatever. Um, Yeah, Christy said for every unhinged person, you probably had 25 people who had the seed planted of what they could do to impact lives from their success. Yes, exactly that. Like, how fucking cool is that? Like, I just think that's incredible. Thank you for saying it so succinctly, Christy. But I think that's true. Like, it gets to be a cool thing. It gets to be something you celebrate. Yes, there are unhinged people, but like you can laugh at it a little bit. I think I put this on a reel, but one lady was like, "Your Look at Me award is on the way to you in the mail." And like that just tickled me. Like I love an award and I'm just so happy to like laugh at that and be like, "Oh yes, my award is on its way." You get to just have fun with it and it's what you make of it. So I hope that's helpful. I hope it like helps recenter like what your goals would be around this, what something like this could actually do for you and what really matters in business. So thank you guys for being here, for listening to me. Um, yeah, that's all I got. I hope you have a beautiful week and I will talk to y'all next week and just so appreciate you showing up for me and for being here and listening. All right, bye guys.